Okay, good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting for Thursday, June 15th. Another sunny day here in Salem. Grateful to live in the great city of Bend. Thank you for having us. And I'd like to start off with something that's not quite so light. We had the tragedy of losing Mr. Ron Davis. He was a contract employee with with one of our contractors, Knife River. He served nearly 25 years in the capacity with Knife River, and I think it's an opportunity for each of us to, first of all, be grateful for each day, but also to be grateful for those that help us do the work that we do in a partnership capacity to make sure that our system is safe. And I know that we're going to be talking safety today, but I just wanted to take a moment and send our thoughts to the Davis family and the importance of each and every individual that are rowing in the direction to make sure that we have a safe and efficient system. And the tragedy of his life is not one that will be forgotten, because we do have a responsibility to make sure that those that are part of our work are safe in an environment in which they are helping to create safety at the same time. So I know that there's a bill that has been going forward of move over, slow down. It seems striking that we need to be told through law that we need to do the right thing. So to the Davis family, our thoughts and condolences are with you, but grateful for the sacrifice and the commitment of partnership that the Davis family have given us. So with that, Director Garrett, I'd like to turn it over to you, and we have a director's report, and then we also have Ms. Kraft who'd like to.
Excellent. Madam Chair, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, thank you for those words. I am very eloquent. It is an unfortunate reminder of the dangerous environment that the men and women of ODOT, the men and women of the construction industry, as well as all those who patrol or move product, goods, and services to and through. Constant reminder of the enormous obligation an individual has when they get behind the wheel of the car to stay focused on driving that vehicle so we can all arrive to the destination point in a safe manner and protect those that are just trying to enhance and strengthen the transportation infrastructure. So I truly appreciate those words, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, given that we are within the last month, so to speak, roughly, of the legislative session, what I thought I'd do is just yield my time and ask Leah Horner to come up and walk us through the status of the budget conversation, the policy conversations, as well as the funding conversations that are playing itself out in the legislature as we speak. So with that, Madam Chair, I turn it over to Ms. Horner.
Thank you. Good morning. Leah Horner, ODOT's Government Relations Manager. And I was going to start with the funding package, but I'll actually start with some of the bills just to piggyback off of the comments that were just made. We got notification this morning that Senate Bill 34 was signed by the governor, and it was our agency's bill to expand the current move over law for anybody who's on the side of the road, so that people now have the option to either move over or slow down and really look at it from a safety perspective. So that was a little bit of a heavy lift for us as an agency, but I think that at the end of the day, it was a really good policy choice to move forward. Having said that, another bill that is still pending in the legislature is House Bill 2594 around distracted driving. There continues to be ongoing conversations. They're up to a -23 amendment on it as of right now, to kind of both be able to hone in on the targeted focus that they have, also make sure that we remain eligible for federal funds, and create good policy around this. So more conversations continue at the Capitol around distracted driving. Our budget is up for a work session in Full Ways and Means on Friday. I don't think there was any surprises in that. We went in without a really heavy lift, asking for a ton of additional policy option packages or staff this session. So that will be heard in Full Ways and Means on Friday, along with the bill around Real ID. And so there continues to be, for lack of a better term, some scuttlebutt around Real ID compliance at the federal level, and so we're doing our best to lean in on the state level to make sure that that bill is successful, and we don't anticipate any barriers as of right now. Our cost recovery bill also continues to sit in Ways and Means, and I think that they're waiting to kind of see what happens with the funding package and how the cost recovery conversation fits into that. And with that, I'll shift gears a little bit to talk a little bit about the transportation funding package. The Joint Transportation Committee rolled out House Bill 2017-3s a couple of weeks ago. And they continue to have conversations around what's in that bill, modifications that need to be made to that. So I'll give you just a quick overview of kind of what's in there. And this is all piggybacking from conversations that the work groups have had since the beginning of February. So in the current version of the bill, it provides $10 million a year for Safe Routes to School within a quarter mile of schools. This is one of the components that we anticipate changing. I think that they want to make a little bit more of a robust investment in that. We have not seen any language around that yet, but that is one of the conversations that's happening. There's also an off-the-top investment into the arts program, so they're also focused on additional safety investments. They continue to have conversations about the three big bottleneck projects in the Portland metro area, so I-205, 217, and the Rose Quarter are the three projects that they continue to talk about, and doing a 50-50 split shared between the MPO and the state as an innovative way to look at how to make those investments on those very, very large projects. They are also continuing to have conversations around what the multimodal transportation investment looks like and how Connect Oregon plays out. The current iteration of the bill has projects earmarked that would fulfill the $71 million that is in the current governor's recommended budget. The projects that they have identified total $61 million, so there's 71 out there. So there's conversations continuing around how to move forward with that. I think, as we've discussed in the past, there's questions about the sustainability of utilizing lottery-backed bonds, just given the different interest groups that are also seeking utilization of those funds. So more conversations around those continue. They also kind of carved out a bucket for Bike Ped to have their own investment outside of the traditional Connect Oregon, where everybody's competing for those same dollars. So they did that a little bit differently. There's also a statewide payroll tax that would generate a significant increase for public transit. And they continue to have conversations about what that distribution would look like, but it's about $100 million worth of investment in public transit. So you have a little handy dandy one pager in front of you. It also shows kind of where the funding investments would be coming from. So they're looking at obviously a gas tax increase. The -3 amendment has it at 14 cents over 10 years. There continues to be conversations about maybe scaling that back a little bit and maybe doing it over a little bit longer period of time. They're looking at a new vehicle tax, which is something different than they've done in the past, as well as a new bicycle tax, which has gotten some media coverage. So they're looking at different options around those as well. As I indicated, they have the statewide payroll tax as well to fund transit. So a couple of policy components that are also in the bill. I think all of you have been engaged in the accountability conversation. They continue to have robust conversations about kind of what that looks like, both for the commission, for auditing purposes, and kind of how we as an agency can be held more accountable. So they continue to look at the nuances in there. There is a piece in the bill that would also require us to seek federal authorization to instigate tolls and look at congestion pricing. So that's a big policy shift that we're also engaged in. It also shifts a number of our roadside rest areas to the Travel Information Council. So that was one of the very last sections that the bill also has in it. It specifies jurisdictional transfers for a couple of highways. not a whole lot of investment behind those as of right now, but there continues to be conversations about how to engage best in those jurisdictional transfers, and not just for the 3 that are identified, but on a larger statewide scale as well. There's also a component of the current iteration of the bill that requires use of salt in the event of 2 inches of ice or snow. So that has some local jurisdictions fretting a little bit. So we continue to engage in conversations with them on that as well. And it also creates a funding source for transportation electrification projects. This conversation is morphing a little bit into maybe EV incentives as opposed to infrastructure investments, but that again is another piece of the conversation that continues to unfold. So our timeline right now, and this is changing hour by hour, if you will, is that the Joint Transportation Committee has not met this week, and they expect to meet probably on Monday. We're hoping for a -4 version of this bill, hopefully tomorrow, for us to be able to analyze as they go into their work next week. I think as with all of the large policy conversations that continue to kind of be on the back burner at the legislature, they're running out of time. And so I think that we'll see some significant movement over the next couple of weeks around the funding package in and of itself. So that was just kind of a quick overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions about anything else.
I would like to say thank you for the commitment of time. I know this has been a lot and quickly. So we've been tracking that closely. I think there are pieces in there that still have some refinement yet to be had, as you've mentioned. So look forward to actually having something that seems a bit more final as a version that we can really move forward with. So, Commissioner, do you have comments or thoughts?
Question and a couple of thoughts. Of course, we, the commission, and I think the department have been very supportive of the idea of the tolling, making sure that doesn't sort of get lost. However, as we know, that's very challenging to do in a practical sense. And I wonder if, I mean, it seems like the whole idea of the vehicle miles travel tax sort of fell off the table in these conversations, and it is an alternative to tolling, in effect, and in my view, a more practical way to do it. I'm just wondering if if that is just really not even in the cards for this discussion.
So I had a conversation yesterday with a member, and I think that there's probably more than one who is interested in looking at shifting. So right now, the electric vehicles are an issue, and paying their fair share on the roads. So there was a conversation about a possible amendment coming forward that would provide the opportunity for an electric vehicle to either pay a flat fee or enroll into the Orgo program. And so there are ongoing conversations. I think there are some members who are hoping for a mandatory program to look more at the Orgo program, but I think they are looking at other opportunities that might present themselves in this bill. So I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's not quite at the forefront as of right now.
Okay. Well, just maybe a couple other comments. I mean, it's obviously it's in the legislature's hands now and not in ours, so my comments probably don't make any much difference, but it is so encouraging to see that the legislature is really taking this issue seriously, wrestling hard with tough issues, and taking on some real interesting ideas. There's a lot of ideas in there that I might not think were great, but the fact that they're dealing with it in a serious way, I think, is really encouraging. I am especially happy to see the discussion about real sustainable funding for transit. That's one of the most encouraging parts of this whole bill, in my view. I am a little concerned about all the additional reporting and committees at various levels. And I look at that particularly from the standpoint of a small jurisdiction. And I'm hoping that they're going to think about this as they refine the bill. We've got there's so much of what ODOT does bubbles up from the grassroots. And there's only so many people in the grassroots in small jurisdictions who can take the time to be really involved. And the fact that we're creating sort of more demands on some of these local folks, I think is going to be a challenge for them. And I hope we can find ways to streamline that. Not that all that input is not valuable. It's just that it needs to be streamlined, and we need to do the things that really have to be done and not everything. And kind of in relation to that, on Connect Oregon, I'm kind of sorry to see the earmarking for the Connect Oregon program. We've set up what I think is a very robust and effective selection process that now is going to sit on the shelf for the next biennium, it looks like, and I'm afraid we'll sort of lose all that institutional structure that we've built up at the local level. So it'd sure be nice to be able to not lose that because of the earmarking. But overall, it's very encouraging.
I would agree.
Okay, onward. Yes, as soon as we get that bill, we'll start sorting through again. So hopefully there are some pieces that won't change. So thank you, Leah, for your work.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have, we were supposed to get together in December and share a bit of the holidays, but it seems that Mother Nature got in the way. Today we are fortunate to have our 3 governor-appointed safety committees that are joining us, and so I'd like to welcome everyone to the front here, and we'll get set for conversation. We do seem a little shy of members today, if you've noted. We had 2 excused absences. One member, Commissioner Brown, will be joining us this afternoon, and then Commissioner O'Halloran had something that came up last minute that was of sensitive nature that needed to be addressed this morning, and he will join us as soon as he can. Yes. Oh, okay, Charles. Yeah. Sorry, I should have noted it, though, thank you. All right. So hard to find a good. Okay, so as we get settled, I'd like to welcome everyone. Mr. Russell, good to see you. Good to see everyone. Mr. Russell, we work together back at home in Bend. I'd like to first say thank you to each one of you for the commitment of time that you put in to do the work that you do. We are going to be talking about marijuana today, and we're going to be talking about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities in front of us in order to be able to take what is now legal and make sure that we are doing all that we can to protect our communities and be aware of the challenges that are in front of us. We have an opportunity and very fortunate to have Mr. Hayes with us today, a national expert who happens to live right here in Oregon and in our backyard. So couldn't be more fortunate to have you with us today. Thank you. So let's start with introductions, if you don't mind, and I hope everyone has a little space there. And Troy, shall we start? Okay, excellent. Please, yes. Victor, we'll start with you.
My name is Victor Hoffer. I am the chair of the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee. I'm a paramedic by trade for the last 35 years and an attorney by hobby for the last 25 years. So I see the results of crashes and particularly what's been going on in the marijuana community on a daily basis out on the street.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Troy Costales, Administrator of the Safety Division for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you for the opportunity to reset and bring all of these volunteers together, along with yourselves that are volunteers. A tremendous amount of knowledge in this room and a lot of dedication for the citizens of Oregon by all of you stepping forward to take that appointment and sit at the chair with the nameplate in front of you to do the work that you do. So thank you for the opportunity to do this.
Absolutely. Please.
Oh, it's my turn. Hello, Matt.
Let's,
Thank you, Chair.
yes,
and
please.
Commissioner.
Let's make sure the light on for you so that we can.
Can you hear me?
The mic is on, but you are going to have to talk right into the mic.
right
we could-
into it.
We could even hand it off if that's
have
more comfortable.
talent.
There we are. Look at that.
How's
Excellent.
that? So
Perfect.
I'm Luis Ornelas,
Okay.
Vice Chair of OTSC. And originally I came to be the Public Works Director for Astoria.
Ah,
Then I went to OHSU, then I did private consulting. As an engineer, I have a lot of cross public and private experiences. So thanks for this discussion.
you bet.
Luis
Thank you.
Ornelas.
Thank you for being here.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jerome Cooper,
Hi.
and I'm an attorney and a former judge, retired judge from Multnomah County, and I'm a member of the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee. And Troy asked me to kind of introduce myself as to my background to a degree. I was deputy and chief deputy in Washington County for 12 years. I was chairman of the governor's task force on DUI for 1 year after that, and then 12 years at the police academy in Monmouth, teaching all of the classes in law. That was my career. And then I moved to Multnomah County trial court administrator for 2.5 years, and 18.5 years as a circuit court judge pro tem.
Wow.
And it's been, in the last 10 years, it's been all traffic that I've done. So the other thing I was going to say, and I tell Matt this, I remind him, this is wrapping up my 34th year of being on these committees. 21 years with the GAC on DUI, and now it's 13 years with the OTSC. So.
Wow. Thank you for your commitment of service.
Graham Munsell, I'm a member of the Governor's Advisory Committee on Motorcycle Safety. I'm an industrial hygienist, safety professional by trade. I've also been the district and chapter educators for the Goldwing Road Riders Association for the last 16 years. It's all about how can we do this more safely.
Great. Hi, Debbie.
Hello, I am Debbie Weber. I am a member of the Governor's Advisory Committee on Motorcycle Safety. I have been a motorcyclist for about 25 years now, and I've gone solo across the country, gone on about 400,000 miles on various kinds of motorcycles. To kind of continue that and encourage people for safe riding, I have a motorcycle accessory store in Albany, selling gear for motorcyclists, gear, helmets, jackets, whatever they need, and things to keep their bikes safe and running safely. My husband does custom motorcycle seats for those people who like to ride lots and lots of miles. So that's what I do.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Chris Henry, Vice Chair of the Governor's Advisory Committee on Motorcycle Safety. I'm also a registered professional engineer in the state of Oregon since 1993 and the transportation planning engineer for the city of Eugene. So my service as a volunteer on motorcycle safety blends both a personal and professional investment of my time. Thank you.
I'm Peter Russell. In my day job, I'm a senior transportation planner for Deschutes County. Hence, that's why I got Chair Boehne. All my work's caught up. I've been riding since 1999, about 125,000 miles under my belt, and joined the committee to keep Oregon's riders safe and make sure that our road systems, both at the local and state level, consider motorcyclists. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Douglas. I'm a member of the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI. In my professional career, I'm an alcohol and drug evaluation specialist. I'm the director of an agency that does the evaluations on all DUI diversions and some of the convictions in Clackamas County. I've done that for almost 33 years. I've been a member of the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI for, I think, 20 or 21 years now. And I'm also a member of the DUI training task force that puts on the DUI conference every year. So I have a daily job of speaking to offenders. So I get to know them pretty well, and I monitor their compliance with treatment and make sure that they're complying with the court's orders, and I work closely with the courts as well.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. Chuck Hayes. I am the chair of the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI, have been for a number of years since my retirement from the Oregon State Police a number of years ago, where I spent 30 years. Retired as the Patrol Division Commander and started my state police career in Bend. Spent my first 10 years there. I now work for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and so what we're talking about today, marijuana and its effect on driving, that is something that I do on a national basis. In fact, this past couple of weeks, I've been working with Delaware, West Virginia, and also Utah that are also going through these very same things. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today, legalization. But within the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI, I mean, we take in all aspects of impaired driving. And so many years ago, we were so focused on drunk driving, and now it has evolved into impaired driving that includes a lot of other impairing substances. So definitely marijuana being one of those, and then talking about that. And then just recently, things that are going on around the country with other substances, especially the opiates and things like that. And then, of course, the recent arrest of a prominent sports figure in Florida, that's really brought a lot of attention also to prescription drugs and driving. So that is all within our realm within the GAC on DUI.
Thank you. I'm John Mercer, presiding judge for the Beaverton Municipal Court. I think the newest member for the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUII, less than a year involved in that. Been the presiding judge for quite some time, a judge in the court for 20 years. Prior to that, I was a district attorney and deputy district attorney for 17 years in Yamhill County. And I try cases daily, regularly. We're the only municipal court in the state that has a specialty court called the DUII court, and I've been doing that for over 6 years. And that's all.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lois Harvick, and I'm, I think, one of the newest members. I started in January with the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUII. I am the program director for the Lane DUII Victim Impact Panel in Eugene. And I'm not new to impaired driving prevention. I was formerly the executive director for Mothers Against Drunk Driving for the southern half of Oregon. I've been with the Victim Impact Panel for about 15 years, and my heart with my position is helping victims of impaired driving get their voices heard on the consequences that impaired driving can happen, either as a victim or an offender. And so my program has had increased attendance of people either being poly users with alcohol and other drugs, but more recently we have had an increase of attendees that are being sent to the Victim Impact Panel being arrested for driving under the influence of marijuana. So we are seeing it directly on a grassroots level with people who are involved that are required to attend, but also the victims that come and speak with our panel are being affected as well, and people actually come impaired or bringing marijuana to our panel, which we are also having to address the significance of that. And so it does have a very multiple level of how legalization is affecting our community.
So let me just start by saying that prescription drugs and marijuana are not new.
No.
But I think with the legalization, it's an opportunity for us as one partner to have a dialogue in terms of what can we be doing and what should we be doing, what are best practices, what is our role in terms of transportation. I wear the hat as a county commissioner during the day as well, and I chair our local public safety coordinating council. There are many partners in terms of how we keep Oregonians safe. And so our role is transportation and our role is statewide. So Mr. Hayes, I'm going to turn it over to you and to let you take the floor and lead us on your discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate this opportunity to come in and talk about recreational marijuana and basically what impact it's having on transportation safety. So, as I said earlier, there's many states that are going through this, and so those states now are kind of looking to Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. It's like, okay, help us with this, give us some answers as we prepare for this legalization that may be happening. And so when we, within the GAC on DUI, when we saw that train coming down the tracks a couple of years ago, we really started working to try to help in preparation for that. And so really 2 years, 3 years out, we still didn't have enough time. And that train really kind of went over the top of us. So with everyone that's sitting here today, what other committee you're in or commission you're in or what portion of transportation safety, we all have to think about drugs and especially the legalization of marijuana. And so as we look at this, we're going to kind of walk through here and maybe look at some of these best practices and kind of talk about what we have done and what we're trying to accomplish within the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI. And then also at the same time, looking at ways and talking about ways that maybe we can involve more of our stakeholders, more of our partners. Because years ago, when I was a young trooper, I used to think that we could just arrest our way out of impaired driving, and that's not the case anymore. We don't have enough officers to do that. And so really it takes a really cooperative effort from many, many different stakeholders and partners when we address this impaired driving issue. And then definitely when we're looking at marijuana legalization and the impact it has on driving. So if we, am I in control of the slides here? Okay. So sorry that's behind you, but so you can see, oh, you're good, great, you can see that. So, so you can see the different committees there and that are involved in this. And so we were originally, as you said earlier, we're going to try to do this in December, but that didn't happen. And so here we are 6 months later. But the great thing is that we're still getting a chance to do this. So when we look at recreational marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, and kind of a little bit about the history here. So the two states that we looked at, obviously, were Colorado and Washington, Colorado being the first state, followed by Washington. And so if you go and talk to those folks, which I have an opportunity to do that almost on a weekly basis, talking to them about the legalization, would they have done some things differently? Oh, yes. They will tell you immediately that we would have done some things differently. And one of those that I just want to plant the seed with you right now is looking at some sort of per se level for impaired driving for marijuana. Both of those states went with 5 nanograms per milliliters of THC in the blood. And so if you ask those states today, would we do that again? They would both tell you, no, we would not do that. And I can give you some really prime examples as to why states don't want to do that. Unfortunately, though, as more states come on board and they're grasping for something that would be similar to a 0.08 blood alcohol level, there's nothing. There really isn't. And so when you start trying to come up with different levels like that, well, first of all, alcohol and marijuana, you can't put them in the same box. They're totally different. And so after that, well, then Oregon, Alaska, and the District of Columbia came on board. And then as you can see, just recently in 2016, that Nevada, California, Massachusetts, and Maine also came on board with legalization as well. Vermont was ready to pass, but the governor vetoed the bill. And so as a result of that now, we're not sure where that stands, but as the governor said in Vermont, I'm going to veto this, and I'm going to veto some of this impaired driving legislation looking at the 5 nanograms because there's just not enough evidence there, so of the impaired driving aspect of that. So as of 2017, if we update that slide now, June of 2017, we actually have 29 states now that have some sort of legalization or medical marijuana on board in their state. West Virginia was just the latest state to do that. And then we're also looking at Delaware. Delaware is probably going to be the next state that takes that on board. So what we're trying to show here is that when it started in 2012, well, now we can just see that that is really kind of going throughout the country and as well. And so it's almost like, okay, if you're a state like Utah, when I was there just last week, they're telling me, no, it's not going to pass here. It's never going to pass in Utah. Well, I'm surprised, if it doesn't pass, because I just feel like that nationally that is the way things are going. And so we try to deal with those obstacles and deal with those issues. So a little bit of a historical background here in Oregon, as you can see. Back in 1972, and yes, I was working in law enforcement back in those days, and so Oregon decriminalized marijuana, and so that was back when, as a police officer, if you found someone with marijuana, you just wrote them a citation and sent them on their way. And unfortunately, back in 1972, law enforcement, we weren't really all that trained and well adversed in impaired driving of marijuana. So we probably let a lot of marijuana impaired drivers go back in the 70s, back in those days. And then in 98, we legalized medical marijuana. And so then, as you can see through the progression, 2012, the ballot measure came up and it failed, but in 2014, it came along again, and then, as you can see, it passed. And so in 2015, those recreational marijuana sales began. And so we know that this is a major industry in the state of Oregon. And so, in fact, Lois and I were just talking about that today. And I said, as I was driving up South Commercial in Salem here, I counted 9 recreational marijuana dispensaries in a 8-block period. So just about every block on South Commercial has some sort of dispensary. And so we know that those sales are going on. And so, again, it behooves us all to understand and be more adverse to what the problem is with driving under the influence of that drug. So this is just some data here from Oregon, and this was kind of a shocker, but the Oregon State Police, according to their data, they told us within the first 6 months of following legalization, there was a 163% increase in DUIs that involved marijuana. Now this could be marijuana by itself as the drug that was determined in the toxicology, or it could be marijuana with other substances as well. And so that is something that we really have got to be concerned about, because marijuana is kind of like the Heinz 57 ketchup. It's mixed with a lot of other drugs and a lot of other substances. So it doesn't always come just by itself. And so it mixes well, apparently, with other drugs, including alcohol. And so we're already starting to see data now that when the marijuana is mixed with alcohol, how it really increases the crash risk. In fact, one expert just published and said it increases it by about 500% when you start mixing those two together. So that has to be something that concerns us. There are a couple of states around the country that are already introduced some legislation about making the penalties for driving under the influence when it involves cannabis and alcohol mixed together, that those penalties might be a little bit more stricter, a little bit tougher because of that very issue. So the data here in Oregon, we're trying to do our best to collect that, and so we're a little bit behind, but really when you look at Colorado and Washington, the same thing happened there. They were very guarded with that data at first, and were very careful about how they released it because they just wanted to make sure that they were doing a very good job of reporting that. So when we talk about marijuana, so we kind of a little education here, well, we know that within the smokable marijuana plant, experts tell us that there's over 400 chemicals that are in that plant. And we don't know a lot about some of those chemicals. And so the CBD, yes, we know about that one, but definitely the tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC, is that impairing substance. And so they are coming up with many different ways now to manufacture products that have THC at various levels, and we'll talk just shortly about that as well. So that's the substance that we're concerned about. That's what we want to be able to determine, okay, do we actually get it and find it in the toxicology samples that we collect from the impaired drivers, because we know that that is the impairing substance. And the THC that we have today, nothing like the THC that we had 20, 30, 40 years ago, and I'll kind of show that to you as well. So, in fact, here's a good sample of that, a good illustration of that, is how the average THC percent has just skyrocketed since 1995. And so when you think about, those of us that can remember Woodstock and things like that years ago, well, the THC content might have been 2 or 3% back in those days. And so then me growing up in Southern Oregon, I heard about things like Maui Wowie, Acapulco Gold, marijuana coming out of Humboldt County, California. Okay, it had a THC content of about 4, maybe 5%. And as you can see now, the government tested THC has skyrocketed up to over 12%. And so people look at that and say, okay, maybe marijuana is not the same as it is today. But then you look at things like this, and this is from a dispensary in South Salem that I just went in the other day and had a little visit with them and looked around and, to see what's going on. And so this is some of the strains now that this one particular dispensary is manufacturing. And so you can see Tillamook Strawberry, and you can see Trainwreck, and some of these things that have these names that maybe draw people to that. But if you look at that second column, look at the THC content. And so that's well above, in the majority of those, what is being tested on the government, the federal side of things. And when you're looking at THC contents that are close to 19, 20% like that, again, this is very dangerous stuff. And it's when you start driving and using this that people don't realize the hazards that are involved in that. And so within this industry, whether it be in Washington, whether it be in Colorado, and right here in Oregon, everybody's on a race to see whether, who can produce the highest THC content. And again, I want you to just think about this. Excuse me, this is the smokable marijuana. This does not even include the edibles. This does not include the oils and the extracts and the vapors and things like that are already now hitting close to 90, 95% of THC content. And so those are, again, things that we have to be really, really concerned about, because there's no way people can operate a motor vehicle when they start using substances like that. So when you look in Oregon, okay, so our average THC content, we're above the national average, really, when you look at it at 16%. And so those numbers have gone up since the legalization, and they're going to continue to go up. And then as you can see, some strains, and these are out of Colorado, Colorado is saying that, okay, we have strains now, like train wreck and some other things that we call it, and it's up well above 25% and approaching close to 30% THC. And then as I talked about, some of the concentrations as well that we have to really be concerned about, not only from the transportation side of things, but also public health, because people are overdosing, and we've almost had a couple of deaths that occurred as a result of maybe some accidental use of that or some unintentional use of it. So as I talked about earlier, real quickly here, is that when we look at this entire thing about marijuana and driving, we cannot put it into the alcohol box. And so we know that alcohol affects the body in different ways. And so it's really linear and how it leaves the body, goes into the body, and then leaves the body as well. And so through 20, 30 years of work, we understand that. But now here we have marijuana, and we don't totally understand this. It's not linear, and so it affects everyone differently. And so you can look at people that are novice users or recreational users, and so smoking marijuana that maybe has a 12, 13, 14, 15% THC level, well, they can be highly impaired, highly affected. And then you look at the chronic users, the people that are using every day, 3 or 4 times a day, which, yes, there are people out there, too many of them, as a matter of fact, well, then they may not be affected to that degree. And so what we really preach within the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI, and every time we have a chance to talk to any legislators about it, is impairment is impairment. And so if they're impaired, it doesn't matter if it's marijuana, it doesn't matter if it's prescription drugs, it doesn't matter if it's over-the-counter substances as well, well, then that should be the criteria. That should be what we're looking for at roadside. That should be the arrest criteria, and that should be the prosecution criteria as well. And so when you look at that and you think about that, we're a little bit behind the rest of the country on that, because our law does not really cover a lot of those impairing substances, and we're hoping to get there. We've tried many times. So our response and ODOT's response and working with Troy's folks and everyone is to really, we got some things that definitely we have accomplished and we continue to work on. So DREs, that's what I do. I help train DREs, and so we've got close to 8,000 now in the United States. And I have to tell you that we have close to 220 here in Oregon. And in my job nationally, coordinating this program, Oregon is in the top 5, without a doubt. Oregon is in the top 5 of the country when it comes to DREs and what DREs do. And so just last year, the DREs in the state of Oregon, 200 of them, they did over 1,600 drug evaluations, which rates number 4 in the country when drug evaluations compared to California and some of the other states. And so they're doing an exceptional job. And we kind of look at Oregon as one of those model states. We've doubled our traffic safety resource prosecutor team because we need that. Because I see all of these questions all the time about these cases coming up to prosecute a DRE case or a drug driving case. And so we need those folks that are helping with that. And then ARIDE, which is the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement Program. We really are working on that because that's a 16-hour course that really trains police officers in what to look for at roadside for a drug-impaired driver, and then be able to make that arrest, look for that impairment, and then be able to call in the DRE that can maybe do the follow-up for them. And then we're also looking at the blood testing grants through the Oregon State Police, because I will tell you right now that every state that has legalized marijuana has had to go back and take a look at this, because all of a sudden now the toxicology requests almost doubled in all of those states. So I'll give you an example. This is a bad example, unfortunately, but North Carolina. So when they went to this, and then with their issues dealing with medical marijuana, and then the marijuana impaired driving incidents that were on the increase, their lab is now 18 months behind in trying to get toxicology results back to the officers. And so what is happening is that many of those cases are being dismissed because the defense is filing motion about not getting the evidence in a timely manner. And so we never want that to happen here in Oregon. So we're taking those steps, looking at new technology that we can do that, including the last bullet there that talks about the instrument that has been purchased and will soon hopefully be utilized here in Oregon. And so that might help us when it comes to that. Hopefully it will. Some other things too is that the drug impaired driving education in high schools, that is something that we're working with many of our liaisons within the GAC, because we understand that education is a huge piece to this. because these young kids are learning in high school or thinking in high school from their friends is that marijuana is not really a drug, and so therefore it's okay for me to use, and it's really a medicine instead of a drug, and so they don't even think about that, the issues of driving, and so we need that education piece in there. And then we're working on a lot of different public service announcements, and we have got some good ones and that are out there thanks to ODOT. And that is just part of the education process too that we all need to work on. The training opportunities, continue to work on that, because again, if you look at those people, and so we're well represented within the GAC of many of those people that you look at up there in that third bullet. And we're even expanding that as well, and we continue to grow with our liaisons that are coming into the Governor's Advisory Committee on DUI. And then the increased funding for high visibility enforcement. So we're not a DUI checkpoint state, excuse me, and you know, who knows if we'll ever get there, but yet we can still do high visibility enforcement. And so we're looking at funding to try to get out there to do more of that. And then that last bullet right there, that's the one that I talked about earlier, and this is where we can really reach out to you and our other partners and everyone in this room today, is that if this concept or if this discussion comes up that when we go to blood that we should just do what Colorado did and Washington did and Illinois did, it's like make it a 5% or 5% nanograms of THC in the blood as being that per se limit, well, let's go with that. Well, I will tell you that there's just not enough science, there's not enough research there. In fact, I was involved in a study that really took a critical look at this. And so we don't want to go down that road until we understand the true science behind that. And so again, thinking that impairment is impairment, and why not go with that and continue with that. So when you look at alcohol versus cannabis and understanding the per se, okay, back in my law enforcement days, we started out at 0.15. And back in those days, the average blood alcohol level in Oregon was a 0.22 back in the 70s. That was the average BAC level. And so we slipped all the way down, got it down to 0.15, 0.14, and did some great things in the 80s with a lot of help from a lot of our different partners and people out there. And so trying to compare that with marijuana, we just cannot do that. As I said, they just don't go in the same box. And so we really need to be very careful when we start talking about per se limits for marijuana in Oregon. And as I've said earlier, you can look at a chart right here, and this illustrates what alcohol does. So we know that it's going to go into the body in a certain rate, and then it's going to dissipate in a certain rate. And so that helps us when we're trying to determine impairment. And so years ago, and so Troy and I have this discussion a lot, it's like when we went to 0.08, was it Utah or Oregon that was first? Well, we say we were first, Utah says they were first, but it was really right about the same time. But what Utah has done, as you know, is they have just now enacted 0.05. And so that was part of my discussions, and I'm going back in November to help them with some training on that as well, as we look at that 0.05 blood alcohol concentration. So do I think that other states are going to follow suit at 0.5? Yes, I do. I think that's going to happen. And so now you compare that. You look at the blood levels of THC, and I mean nothing even close as to way it gets into the body. It gets into the body so much more rapidly than alcohol does, as you can see from that red line just skyrocketing on the left-hand side of the chart. And then look at that dissipation. And so even though that THC is dissipating the body, the person can still be impaired, and they will be impaired up to 4 to 5 hours after that last smoke or that last use or ingestion of that marijuana. And so if we're testing people and we're saying, okay, we're going to use 5 nanograms in the blood, we are going to miss a lot of people that are truly impaired, but yet the toxicology is not going to support that if we have that law in place. In Washington, they wish they would have never gone with 5 nanograms because of that very issue. And then when you look at some of the things that are happening now in Colorado and Washington, and it took a while for them to really start rolling that data out. But thanks to the Colorado State Patrol, they took kind of the lead on this. Well, now we're starting to see some numbers that are coming out of Colorado, especially dealing with crashes, that are very, very concerning. And so the advocates, the people that were supporting marijuana and saying, well, we're all a bunch of safe drivers when we're high and we're stoned, that's not really the case. And so now we're not hearing that because there's so much crash data that's coming out of Colorado now that is indicating just the opposite. So the misconceptions out there, yeah, there are many misconceptions. And so this is a case study that I was actually involved in and worked with some experts on a national level. And this is one now that is being used where we looked at DRE data. And it was only evaluations that were done by DREs that had determined that the person was impaired by marijuana. And so you can see the criteria there, and the data came from 9 different states. And one of the things we wanted to look at was, okay, some of the driving indicators. What caused this person to get arrested for marijuana? And so as you can see right here, this is the data that came from those 302 cases. And you're not going to see one little bar up there about driving too slow or driving too safe, because out of the 302 of those cases, one lady in Colorado was stopped and arrested for driving too slow. And she was doing 45 miles an hour on the interstate, which is a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit. And so the trooper stopped her because it was like, I'm concerned that maybe something is wrong, something medically is going on. So one out of those 302. And as you can see, speeding, crashing, weaving, not able to maintain your single lane of travel, those are the 3 big ones. And then at the end of that, the 11.3%, all of those cases were people driving without headlights at night. And so they fell into that category as well. So what we're seeing here is that it's the cognitive effect really with marijuana more so than what we see with alcohol. And so a lot of those were cognitive indicators. So I'll just leave you with just one thought here, is that when we move forward, everybody that's at this table today and everybody that's in this room, we look to you to help us with this issue, because it's something that we can't just one commission or one committee do it alone. ODOT can't do it alone. The state police can't do it alone. So we want to get all of our partners together. And so this year we had a bill that was introduced in the legislature where we wanted to expand the definition of DUI to include any impairing substance or any impairing drug. We have tried that so many times. And this year we really felt like we were very, very close. We had a couple of hearings on it, and then all of a sudden, behind the scenes, that bill was killed. And so there are 5 states in the country that do not have that law in place, that any impairing drug or any impairing substance for DUI. We're one of the 5. We've been there for a long, long time. So other states have already taken that step, but we just can't seem to take that step forward here in Oregon. And so we need to be looking at that, because truly impairment is impairment. It doesn't really matter what the substance is. And so when you get into these committees and you're ready to have a hearing, and then you walk in thinking that you're looking pretty good and this is going to move forward, or at least has a chance to move forward, and then you find out that a large trucking association comes in and works to kill the bill, it was very disheartening to us. Because on the federal level, when you look at what's happening with the federal motor carrier, they support things like that. But yet in Oregon, we didn't have that support. So it was very disconcerting to us. It was very disappointing.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's start there. And this is a dialogue. So I know we have a number of individuals, but I want it to be, back and forth. And so please just maybe name tent or something. If you were to generalize the concerns raised about legislation, how would you categorize the concern?
The concern would be just my last example, is that when we try to get all of the partners together that are truly trying to make transportation safety better, and they publicize this and they talk about our efforts to make transportation, and we're safety conscious, safety minded, but yet when a bill like this comes along that is truly going to work to make that even better, and then we don't get anywhere because of differences of opinions. Mm-hmm. It was kind of disheartening. So it's just trying to get all the groups together and then to move forward so that we can become like the rest of the country in any impairing substance. Because I didn't talk about all of these other crazy drugs that are out there that are impairing people, that are non-controlled substances, and they're being detected in our drivers that are under the influence, but yet we cannot prosecute them for DUI.
Well, even our teens roboblasting or using cough medicines and all types of, it doesn't matter. So I think the approach of really a substance that is impairing your ability to perform the duties of a driver certainly seems logical. So I'd love to talk more offline in terms of kind of the concerns that are raised in reference to the legislation.
Well, thank you, Madam. Well, just following up on that, what are the arguments, the substantive arguments that are being made against
Right, that was my, I didn't know if you, but if we're putting you in an awkward, I get it, yes.
I mean, I can understand maybe politics, but I'd like to hear what they say when they're making statements in public that they don't want to see.
I think it
impaired
comes
driving.
back to people losing jobs because maybe they're arrested and therefore losing their livelihood. Maybe those are some of the things. And then I think it boils down to the over-the-counter substances that we know, Benadryl and as you said, the Robitussin and things like that, diphenhydramine, that are impairing, that people use, and they feel like that maybe some people would be unfairly targeted.
Yeah, other drivers, other people on the road are being unfairly targeted. Wow.
You know, it's interesting, if I go back to the, when methamphetamine was coming online, we had challenges in hiring because at the time we also had a workforce shortage. And if we look at the workforce shortage right now, sometimes we make decisions not based on good practices, but on the immediate need. And that employment workforce sometimes outweighs the safety. I've watched it happen before. I'm not suggesting that's happening now, but sometimes it's not common sense that's prevailing.
Thank you.
Please, Mr. Russell, or Mr. Henry, however you want to fight over the microphone, please.
Okay. Peter Russell. So it's a very good conversation to have, again, from the GAC motorcycle safety perspective, because you were on both sides of the coin. So we basically lose, on our serious and fatal injury crashes, 25 to a third are related to alcohol. So we don't have MJ data yet, but we're assuming based on what the previous gentleman talked about, it's not going to go down. So we have that as an operator, but we're also a vulnerable road user by your safety action plans lumped in there with the bikes and the PEDs. So for us, marijuana presents a double challenge. One is how to prevent riders from riding impaired, and second, how to ensure the safety of sober riders when the other people using the road system are not unimpaired. And so that's one of the things we're constantly wrestling with. We can deal with the riders through our outreach. We have liaisons with Oregon State Police, Portland Police Bureau, and riding clubs come to our meetings. So there's a good dialogue with the riding community and outreach. The one that we're working on is how do we also get the message out to drivers as well. And Chris, I think you had some.
Chris Henry, on the Motorcycle Safety Committee. I'll take a slightly different tack to that. I think our influence issues are important to address at a societal level. And I would suggest that they are mode agnostic, that people that use or become under the influence of alcohol or other substances, including marijuana, are doing that whatever type of vehicle they're operating. And the fatality rates are similar for alcohol in motor vehicles and motorcycles. Drivers in both cases are about the same rate of alcohol influence. Again, we don't know what that data is for marijuana, but I would suggest that we should continue our efforts to address impairment for everyone and not necessarily think, well, we need to work on motorcyclists differently than we need to do for motor vehicle drivers. It's within our transportation system as a whole. And it's difficult to operate a motorcycle. It takes a greater number of skills than driving or operating a car. And being under the influence of alcohol or marijuana makes that even more difficult. And I wouldn't suggest that, I don't think the data suggests that if you use marijuana that you'll become, that it will change your driving behavior. It's already really hard to do. And you're likely to die in any number of ways. But I don't think that it's necessarily, we should continue to focus on the impairment and come up with methods that are manageable in our system.
I agree.
I just wanted to highlight the changes that I've seen over the years in people's perception of marijuana. Because it is now legal, I can't tell you how many young folks have come into my office with the opinion that it's not a drug. I mean, adamantly arguing that it's not a drug, or that it's medicine. But I've also seen an increase in adults using it, thinking that it's safe because it's legal. And so part of that, this package is getting people to understand that just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's changed, that it's safe, especially when it comes to the edibles. People don't understand that, you know, when they say a serving is one nibble off of a gummy bear, you know, they're not clear about how much THC is in that product. And people are eating it not understanding that edibles take longer to feel the effect. So they don't think they're getting the effect, so they eat more. And that's how people are overdosing. So I think, you know, the public education part of this is really important as well.
And it's probably not unlike with prescription medications where it's been prescribed, so it must be safe, right? That I can forego the warning on the label. I had an opportunity to do a tour recently into a dispensary, and if you don't know what to, first of all, as an elected official going into a dispensary, I, you know, don't find myself there, but you don't know what to ask. You don't know what to, I mean, this is so foreign, and you're right. It's a chocolate bar. It's a soda for $22. But it's, you know, I think that education piece, it is legal. We're managing that. Now what? So what best practices are in other states that we can glean? And we happen to be pioneers in Oregon, so what should we actually be developing as well? And primarily from a transportation side, what are we lacking?
And if I could expand that, and other countries.
Oh, and yes, thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, I think when we look at other states, we definitely look towards Colorado and Washington, and not only can we learn from some of their good things that they've done, but more importantly, we can look at some of the things that they wish they would have done differently. And so, as I mentioned, this 5 nanogram, trying to establish a per se level is something that is probably right at the top of the list. But I also think what we have to do is that we have to look at maybe the possibility of just a 0 per se as well. I mean, maybe there's a lot of foreign countries are doing that. So if it's any illegal drug that is in the system and you test positive for that illegal drug, well then use that as maybe a standard for the law. And so I think we need to do a lot more education. We need to have that education really down at that grade school, high school level, because just as Teresa is talking about with her young people that are coming in, and then we really have to kind of step up the focus as well with our judges. And so I'm lucky to have a judge on the committee here that really truly understands this, because again, the same mentality is thinking there, and the prosecution, all of those kind of things. So as we look at the entire DUI arena and everything within the DUI circle, so to speak, we really have to now, all of a sudden, we've been so focused on alcohol for 30, 40 years. Now we need to truly focus on some of these other substances as well, and take a look at every one of our traffic safety, our transportation programs, and say, okay, are we reaching out? Are we touching those areas of other things other than just alcohol? Because we've done a really good job through the years, but it took us a long time. And so now we're trying to do this catch up. And then the other thing that really concerns me about, that we mentioned earlier, is this race that seems to be going on between all of the manufacturers of marijuana trying to get these higher THC levels. And so that was something we talked about early on. It's like, should states be looking and saying, you know what, enough is enough. You can only go to this certain level of THC. And then if you get, we don't want you going beyond that because it becomes a public health risk. And so just in your area alone, Madam Chair, we had a young girl that overdosed on an edible candy bar that almost died at St. Charles Hospital. And so that is something that we need to be thinking about as well.
So would it be practical to set some kind of limit, including on edibles, that says you can't consume a product that has more than X level of THC in some period of time? It sounds like it would be very difficult to enforce something like that.
Well, Madam Chair and Commissioner Lowen, I believe that, yes, that is something that we probably should be looking at. It should be at least in the discussions here. Now, would we have opposition from the recreational marijuana business in Oregon? Sure we would. Yeah. Because they don't want people running to Washington to get higher THC candy bars or gummy bears or smokable marijuana because maybe we've established a cutoff level. But you think about what we've done with alcohol through the years. I mean, So, I mean, we have basically, you can only go to certain levels of alcohol in the drinkable products. And so maybe that's something that we need to be having in our conversations down the road here, because we don't know where this is going to go. I mean, the technology is changing so rapidly that none of us can keep up with that.
We do have an opportunity, though, and we've done this before. We know it's standard, 1 drink an hour. That's pretty standard. Flying, 8 hours from bottle to throttle. It's kind of a coined, you know, we have these sort of standards where they're common sense. I believe that we can change the cultural norm in terms of this particular new industry for Oregon as well. But I think it's going to take that coordinated effort of all parties moving in the same direction with the same messaging so that we can have strength behind that and able to truly set a precedent of here's the standard. I think the challenge is from a DRE or even from a you know, having the substance in your system, at what level was I impaired? And if we don't go to 0, unless we were to have some sort of a test, drawing blood on the side of the road is not going to happen. That will not happen. So do you feel that we're close to some sort of a test? I know that there's a race to that market as well. Whoever identifies you are impaired to a certain level test strip that's on the side for a law enforcement, they will be the individuals that we are all going to want to.
Well, Madam Chair, we are working in that direction with a lot of different companies and scientific experts in this area, but we are so far from having something that is truly reliable. And so we heard a great deal about the marijuana breathalyzer coming out of the state of Washington or Washington State University. Well, that was tested and found out it wasn't all that accurate. And so we're moving in that area, getting closer to that technology. California, good example, their highway safety office there, they are grasping at trying what to do about the legalization there. And so they've done some pilot projects with some oral testing devices at roadside, but they're finding out that they're really not all that greatly accurate. And so then here's the issue too, is that I have the person that tests positive orally with saliva test at roadside, but somebody's still got to determine whether or not that person's impaired. And so there's where the DRE, the trained officers, come in. And so we don't want to get into a situation where we're just arresting people at roadside that test positive with an oral testing device and making the arrest. And so that would do us more harm than it would good. So we've still got to have people that can make that determination.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Lois
please.
Harvick.
Yes.
I just wanted to dovetail or piggyback a little bit on what Teresa was saying as far as public opinion for users and non-users about the evidence that marijuana does impair according to driving ability. And recently at a victim impact panel, we actually showed, I guess you'd call it a smoke lab. I'm not sure. They got people impaired. They smoked marijuana, different levels of users. I think it was in a county in Washington State. I think it was Thurston County. You can actually watch it online. And they did various testings, and they drove, and they smoked a little bit more. And I was kind of watching the audience, and there was still just an impression of humor, like it was funny. And I think that I am seeing that there's just not a seriousness. I actually was talking to my sister yesterday who lives in California. It's recently legalized there. And she has a neighbor who said, you know, I have no problem with impaired driving in pot because, you know, if anything, it's going to mellow them out and people are going to drive better. And so there's still that opinion that it's not harmful, even for people who don't indulge. And I'm finding that, you know, people who come to the panel, they are irritated. They got arrested for marijuana Dewey and like, why am I here? This is ridiculous. And I think that from a prevention point of view, beyond the arrest, that if we can somehow get the message that marijuana is impairing and it does affect your driving. And that's where I see there's something that's still humorous. There's something that's still Cheech and Chong about the whole issue.
Please.
Thank you, Victor Hoffer, Chair Benny. There's 2 comments I want to make, and actually they've been made, but I want to reinforce them. Teresa was talking about education. And I teach second graders, first graders, and kinders, fire prevention, helmet safety. And we need to start young because some of these children are watching their parents smoke, and they start to smoke with them when they're 12. You teach kids, you got to wear a seatbelt. What do they say to mom? Mom, where's your seatbelt? You teach them they got to wear a helmet when they're on their bike. And what do they say when they put their helmet on? Dad, where's your helmet? So we want to start as young as possible. Enforcement and coupled with young education. The issue, I think, sometimes in public health is that we tell people they can't smoke cigarettes, but we're not telling them they can't smoke marijuana. It's okay to smoke cigarettes. It's never okay to smoke cigarettes no matter how old you are, but it's okay to smoke marijuana when you're 21. That's a public health paradigm that needs to change. That needs to change. Secondly, as you were saying a moment ago, I go to marijuana conferences. I get paid to be there. I'm the paramedic. I'm not paying to go. Make that clear. And everybody says marijuana is safer. And when I look at them, I say, well, we have someone, 2 sticks of dynamite in one car, 1 stick of dynamite in the other. When they go off, neither of them are safe. The result is the same. So they can put out that propaganda, but when the crash occurs, 2 sticks or 1 stick, you're still dead. Thank you, Chair Bain.
Judge Mercer, I understand that there may be a program that you're familiar with, Be Sober. Would you mind explaining that for us?
That's our DUI court program.
So that's your treatment court.
And where
Okay.
we focus
Great.
on the high-risk, high-needs offender, the one that has the more severe addiction problem, to try to, well, the more likely they're going to repeat the same behavior and higher risk of killing somebody. And so there are a lot of evidence-based practices in that field surrounding the things we're discovering about addiction, about what successful treatment is, how long it takes, what some of the issues are, and I'm being conservative here, 95% of the people involved are polysubstance abusers, and so your marijuana is one of them that's almost universal that's involved. So one of the things we're experiencing is that treating addiction as it crosses with driving is not a simple problem, because addiction so permeates behavioral health choices, physiological health impacts, and families. And so our program is just trying to focus on what we call the dumpster fire cases, where that really most of their lives are not intact. And Beaverton is a middle class or upper middle class community. The same problem affects all stratas of society. We've got, right now we have lawyers in our program that are in the high risk, high needs cases. And some of the things we're finding with treating substance abuse addictions related to alcohol and marijuana is the denial patterns, and the way that's infiltrated your thought processes is entirely different than someone addicted to methamphetamine or heroin. So the role of seeing that as a legal substance is significant in how they built the patterns of addiction into their life. So it's a complicated process, and one where we're finding a great deal of success focusing on the high risk, high needs offender. But several of the obstacles we see are really the role of insurance company funding and treatment processes, so that it's really not adequate to deal with the level of treatment that's needed. And there's a great deal of no communication in the treatment world between substance abuse addiction and behavioral health issues. Those counselors usually don't communicate, and they both have huge pieces of the problem. So there's a lot of things that can be done in the treatment community. Currently, the Oregon administrative rules related to treatment expectations are so badly outdated that they need to be revised dramatically, and I understand the health department is aware of that and is trying to work on that. So there's lots of things related to the person that's severely addicted. It's probably the most studied criminal law field of any, more than traditional parole and probation model, what works best with the most addicted person. And so there's a lot of evidence-based practices there that could be, I think, valuable and trying to implement responses by court systems in dealing with impaired drivers. Most of the cases that we see in our highly addicted people, we have about a 93% success rate reducing recidivism and costs to the system, which is about twice or more as high than your traditional parole and probation model of dealing with a person just through conviction. Not that there's fatal flaws with parole and probation, they're just overwhelmed by so many cases that they have to handle, that they don't have the time to give the attention to addiction, when there's a lot of other public safety issues that get more attention publicly that that don't kill as many people but yet get more attention. So in our court, another amazing thing we see is we just handle misdemeanor violations of DUI law, not the felony level. And we're seeing the presence of severe addiction start at the very beginning, from the very first arrest. It doesn't take 7 arrests. It doesn't take the traditional, we see what started our program was in 1 year we saw a 300% increase in the number of first-time diversion-eligible cases where the breath test was over a 0.15. And they just weren't getting treatment that they needed to not to repeat the behavior and endanger somebody. So misdemeanor court levels are the battlefield now, not just the circuit court, felony court levels, where addiction is impacting traffic and public safety. So hopefully the municipal courts, we're one of 162 in the state of Oregon, the only one that's got this side of a program to deal with those kind of cases. So it's on the court side, we're aware probably more so than the public by a long ways on the impacts of addiction on families, on jobs, on employers, on cost to the criminal justice system, and cost to courts. And I'm an advocate for intensive supervision courts as a way to reduce recidivism and to reduce costs to the rest of the criminal justice system. And we've tried some innovative programs with some help from ODOT and had a great deal of success in our blood testing program, our no refusal city policies, and our DUII court. And so I covered a lot of ground there, so I'm sure that provoked some more questions. But the court systems are clogged with seeing drug and addiction cases. It's really difficult to keep statistics about marijuana impairment because everyone's a polysubstance abuser and there isn't any strict test that you can find if you don't get a blood sample or a urine sample to show the presence. But it's just the officers have to assume that every offender is polysubstance abuser. So that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars of training needed for police statewide to become aware of how to detect and see the impact from that. So we see part of that cost. Repeating myself because of my own sort of enthusiasm for specialty courts, if a county or a court system that handles DUI courts doesn't deal with the severe high-risk offender through a specialty court, they're misinformed. They're not doing as good a job as they could. So that's my my ask at the end.
Great.
Thank you.
Good. Well, and for us, we have a variety of specialty courts as well, but not similar to what you have. And addiction does not discriminate, and I appreciate you mentioning that as well. And no one wakes up on a Tuesday and wants to find themselves in that situation. And your success rate of 93%, not only do you have individuals that are getting their lives back and their families back in line as well, but it's also the opportunity to have some advocacy from those individuals about what they've learned and be able to share their story too. So thank you for sharing that program. Please.
I forgot to say in the spectrum, Beaverton, I think statistically is the most ethnically diverse city in the state. It's got the highest percentage of all different populations. On an average year, we have to have about 52 different interpreters that come through our court system for various languages. And all of the people from the different nationalities knew how to drink before they got here. It's culturally, cross-culturally, it has nothing to do with race, religion, ethnic background, gender. Having intensive supervision courts that are sensitive to LGBTQ issues is essential. There's so much pain in folks from that background that you easily have to incorporate new ideas. So developing a partnership from the beginning with a behavioral health, we've developed a partnership with Lewis and Clark graduate program and masters in psychology, and they're on our team. And so we just have to get everybody connected up at the very beginning because there's so many issues. And having counseling available when languages are a problem is the focal point in Beaverton because there's so many language issues, and whether it's Asian or Middle Eastern or Russian, we get them all. And so there's big issues there, and federal government is very sensitive to that, and has highly rewarded us with help financially to include interpreters in all kinds of contexts and treatment. But the treatment community is just suffering from the ability to implement the evidence-based curriculum that lasts long enough and still have the funding and the requirement from different insurance sources to be able to get the person through that. So that's the frontier that we see it from the court system, is the treatment community and getting them trained, educated, funded, and be able to afford the treatment that people need. So thank you.
Well, this is very educational for me. I wish every parent in the state could hear this discussion. I guess part of what I mean, it's a little it's disheartening to hear all the problems. So part of what my takeaway is we've got. I won't say insurmountable, but we have very difficult issues in terms of training of law enforcement folks, adapting the judicial system to deal with this problem. We've got societal education that needs to occur. We've got health impacts that are serious that need to be addressed. We've got treatment programs that hardly exist now and that need to be changed. We've got research that needs to be done in this arena so all these other systems can be better informed. But what it comes down to, I guess, to me is it comes down to what can we do to set some kind of minimum, I don't know what it is, level or requirement for just plain old driving safety. And it gets back to, I think, what you were saying, Mr. Hayes, about some legislation that we have tried. I don't know who's tried it, and I'm interested in that. Who has tried to set some kind of standard, whether it is forgetting about the source of impairment and just make it impairment, any type of impairment. If that's the kind of legislation you're talking about, or legislation that says even if you've got 0.00 and 0.001 impairment, that's sufficient, or whatever. I'm looking for some at least absolutely minimal things that we could do, and so far, all I'm hearing is how difficult the problem is. We've got to start taking some steps to deal with it, and really in all of these systems. But on the just driving safety, what could be done with legislation that could have a real impact, even if it didn't move the needle, 50%. If it moved it 5%, it would be effective.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Lohman, I think that with the legislation, we have tried that, and Troy and Dan can help me on this, but it seems like maybe 4 legislative sessions, maybe even 5, where we've tried to catch up to the rest of the country with just any impairing substance, and we just cannot seem to get there for one reason or another. It's been introduced by committees, it's been introduced by legislators, it's been introduced through the GAC. So we have tried a number of different avenues, and so we just cannot get past this, just certain groups coming in and just doing their best, and their lobbyists outnumber us by far, and so they kill these bills before they have a chance to actually succeed. So we really need to explore this and educate people and look at this impairment as impairment no matter the substance, because As I was looking here at the top 24 drugs that are being detected by the crime lab. And so when you look at these crime lab drugs that are being detected, there's a number of these things that are non-controlled. And so, as we know, diphenhydramine, things like that are over the counter, every year it's within the top 10 in DUI cases. Cannabis far exceeds that. But yet we're starting to see more and more of these strange non-controlled drugs that are coming out there. And so just as we know, the synthetic cannabinoids, we cannot keep up with that quick enough as those things keep coming along. And so now the rest of the country is being hit with a lot of these new synthetic drugs, whether they're a synthetic Xanax or synthetic different type of opiates as well. And so we're behind the ball because when that hits us here in Oregon in a DUI case, we can't prosecute those people. So when we can't prosecute them for DUI, then they don't go through the system. As you've heard here today, they don't get the treatment, they don't get the follow-up and those kind of things that are necessary. And so then they're just able to continue that habit. So we've got to really work on that, trying to get everybody together and then figure out, okay, why can't we pass this bill when everybody else in the country continues to do it? Why is Oregon not being able to do it? Who are the people that are behind this movement to not pass this bill, and why are they not taking the position of transportation safety?
Okay, and that's what I want to try to focus down on. Whose bill has it been that has not gotten anywhere? Is that, have we at ODOT introduced a bill that says any substance that causes impairment is going to be subject to enforcement?
Commissioner Lohman, as Mr. Hayes pointed out, it's come through the Governor Advisory Committee on DUII.
Right.
It has come through legislators themselves. It's come through legislative work groups. It has been 5 or 6 sessions where there's been a bill introduced, and sometimes it's come in and said, well, let's not talk about all impairing substance. Maybe let's talk about those top 10 and just add to the current list in Oregon, which is very prescriptive of what is considered impairment. Let's at least add the worst 10 to that list. Or let's talk about all. And what has happened is the group, every session, the group around the table that's in the discussion to talk about, yes, let's do this, grows from the prior session for the people that said no, get them in the conversation, have this type of education, and they say, oh, we get it. So they add to the fold, and the community coming forward gets bigger every session. But then somebody else pops up that wasn't in the original conversation and just puts enough of a conversation to taint the communication, to bring doubt to legislators to say whether or not this is correct policy for Oregon, or the application of how would you get the blood. Do we have a lab set up to be able to test the blood? How would an officer obtain that evidence? And Mr. Cooper can talk about some of that, the issues of how evidence comes to bear in court cases. They bring little sidebar pieces up enough to cause doubt in legislators to then, without in the public setting, but in the behind-the-scenes conversation, to say, we're not ready for this. And that's when it steps down. And it's somebody new, seemingly every session. It's a new community or a new storyline that then pushes it enough to where it stops.
I'm hearing who the opposition is, sort of. I want to know who the supporters are. Is ODOT introducing legislation like this? Is the Oregon Health Authority explicitly backing it? Are the Sheriff's Association is? I mean, it seems like it's got to be everybody telling the legislators, hey, we can't just let these little sort of nitpicky things get in the way. We've got to establish a floor here of that we can enforce.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Lohman, I can just tell you that, yes, we work really hard to get all of our partners on board. Now, we have to understand that there are some state agencies that are not allowed really to maybe take a position on this. And so we understand that there's some rules there, but getting the Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association, the Oregon State Police Association, and getting other folks as well that are involved in this, yes, they are coming forward. We're getting those people to actually meet with legislators, talk to legislators, be there at hearings and testifying. But yet, as we know, and being involved in the legislative process, as I did in patrol operations for the state police, I know that sometimes there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work, so we go in, we meet with those folks and spend hours and hours with them, and then other groups come in behind us, and as Mr. Costala said, they just spread the doubt. And so all of a sudden, you think you've got the votes, you think you've got the support, and we don't. And so I think it's a matter of just, can we finally just get everybody to the table and agree that impairment is a problem. It is a transportation safety issue that should be on the forefront of everybody that's involved in the transportation network in this state. And then also really take a look at it, and we need to do more of this from the public health standpoint as well. Because, I mean, these products that we're talking about, these over-the-counters, these new non-controlled substances that people are making, they're a huge public safety detriment. I mean, they really have some impact on us in that area of public health as well.
Yeah, and well, I think all of these issues are, have to be dealt with somehow. I'm sure I'm way naive on this, but it seems like we have to start with something. And the something, it seems to me, is, minimum levels of driving safety. I know how complicated this is. I'm the city attorney in Ashland, and we've dealt with land use and enforcement issues a lot. A year or so ago, I think I mentioned to the commissioners, I spoke with the assistant city attorney in Denver, whose sole job is dealing with marijuana issues for Denver. And she said, literally, on average, every 2 months, we have a new problem or a new insight that causes us to have to go back and change our ordinances because something pops up that we hadn't anticipated in connection with this. And I know it's a tough issue, but we got to figure out, rather than just say how complicated it is, we got to take some action.
Well, the chair mentioned public safety councils, coordinating councils, and so with my days with the state police, I was on 2 of those, not only in Lynn County, but in Benton County as well. And so I think if we look down the road and maybe look for some things that we can do, I think that's an area around the state that we could really reach out to and get more involvement from those public safety coordinating councils out there. And so we wanted to do that and just didn't have the opportunity. So maybe looking as a possibility of trying to get to those people and really talk about these issues about impaired driving and drug driving, that might be a good step.
Yeah, Mr. Hayes, I'd be happy to partner with you on that through the Association of Oregon Counties. I think that might be a good avenue to be able to work, and certainly happy to pilot and champion or whatnot. So I'd like to go ahead, Mr. Russell and then Ms. Weber, and then I'd also love to hear from both of you gentlemen too, your thoughts. And before we end, I also want to hear, if you were us, what would you be doing today? And maybe there isn't an answer, but you're seated here. What can we do to assist the work that you are doing as well? So, Mr. Russell, or if you, however you'd like to work that.
Debbie Weber. Listening to all of this, it is very complicated, and it makes me remember when so much focus was put on drunk driving. Okay, there became the public service announcements for don't drink and drive. There were, and maybe there still are, I haven't seen them lately, but the signs along the freeways that says if you see somebody driving drunk, call this number. Why don't you start instead of trying to chip away at this big wall of legislation that is constantly being blocked by special interests, just start out simple. Don't go there. Start out with just a mass campaign of public service announcements for all kinds of impaired driving, whether it's drugs, whether it's using your cell phone, whether it's drinking still, whatever it is. But start out there. If you can't get away one, try a completely different way of going at it and just bombard people with it. I don't know where the money would come from, but that seems like that might be a little bit easier thing to tackle than trying to go through legislation, at least for now. Wait until this is, because marijuana's been legal for 2 years now, so give it a couple more. As things change, then maybe people's attitudes will change. But it's the only thing I can think of.
Who's taking the lead on education and awareness around, I'll just be candid, it feels a whole lot like a Ready, Fire, Aim in terms of, we've talked about the gaps in our system and the being able to, from a law enforcement perspective. And so is there an agency that is taking the lead right now on education and awareness in the state? Because, please, it's us.
Madam Chair, it is
Okay.
us. We do, Mr. Estes is in the back, who's our DUI program manager for the department, for the division. He's got a sample of one of the things that we do from the safety point of view, and we come from that safety angle.
Right.
Some of our partners, in public health in particular, are restricted from going beyond some of the very minor prevention-style communication to be advocate, to be aggressive. They're told they cannot. And
Okay.
so oftentimes what happens is we end up, from the safety point of view, develop programs that then get into some of the prevention or some of the treatment or some of the other angles in relationship to this, the area of impairment. But our reach is limited as well. But we do tremendous amount as far as value of space and time that we get in this program area alone is a couple $1 million a year worth of outreach that is done. And the messages have got to be less than a tweet. I mean, you were talking 6 to 8 words. And so what do you convey with the words? What do you convey with the picture or the image that's with it? And we will cycle through certain messages, but they time throughout the year with 2 or 3 versions, and we time that then with law enforcement presence so that when you hear or see the message, you also come into the spot of saying, I have the potential risk of being apprehended. That, from a human behavior point of view, is the best way to break the habit, break the cycle, to change human behavior, is that you hear about the risk of apprehension or incarceration, and you see it happening. And so you couple those together. Well, law enforcement is not aplenty within this state.
Right.
And in some areas of the state where this issue is in double-digit percentages of problems, and you both represent communities of that particular need, when we run the campaign, do we have that enforcement available too? And do we have enforcement that's trained to know what they're looking for and to deal with the evidence and the situation that they have at roadside? So we do work with our partners, and it's great to have the collaboration that we have with all 3 of these committees. I feel so humble and honored to work with these folks because I feel like I get to be that mid-year NBA coach that gets the best of the best and have all-stars around around the table, because these are the folks that make it happen in their communities and in their professions, but then they volunteer to come forward and say, what do we need to do as a state as well? And there are those things that we run into, so related to just having the resources available like law enforcement or our treatment partners. But you're looking at our agency. Your agency is the one that is really the most out in front when it comes to some of that education. And Dan's got a sample that we can share if you, or leave it with you if you'd like, about how we try and get across that message. But as you heard, the community thinks it's safe, it's legal, it's safe, and it's a medicine now, and it's not considered a drug or dangerous. So how do we, from a transportation point of view, lean on that within the limits we have of our authority and responsibilities too?
So I appreciate that, and I know that we have been really leaning into this, as you've mentioned. We are developing an agenda with OHA to have a conversation with their commission as well. So let's put this on that list of topics. The prevention piece, yes, but it's hard to dispute facts. And education is really on that public health side, critical to the overall getting to the second grader and creating this cultural norm of change. So, and I do recognize the challenges from a law enforcement perspective and how lean, it's almost as though we are developing more work but less resource. It feels an awful lot like it's kind of a teeter-tottering that's not working. So anyway, so if we can bookmark that for a conversation, I would really like that. And commission to commission, we may be able to have a different conversation that helps support the work as well.
Madam Chair?
Oh, please.
Just one thing that if I could add to that, when you have that meeting with that organization, I think that's great because they are truly, truly a big partner in this entire thing. But one of the things that we strive to look for and try to collect is data. And so Other states, as I mentioned earlier, Colorado and Washington, very slow about getting their data out, but now it's slowly starting to come out. And so we in Oregon, we struggle with that because, as you heard the judge talk about, you've heard Teresa talk about, a lot of people coming within their realm of this entire process, but yet we don't really have a really great picture statewide as to, number one, crash involvement in marijuana, because we still, this is something that maybe we have to think about legislatively, is requiring that every deceased driver or someone involved in a fatal traffic crash is tested for drugs, because it's not happening. So we really can't even give a true picture on that. And then also some other things that we might have to deal with legislatively, and then collecting data as well, is that other states are already, that have legalized marijuana, are starting to see more and more drivers refusing to give toxicology, whether it be urine or blood. Massachusetts, as an example, 59% of their DUI cases where the driver was suspected of drug driving because of marijuana, refusing to give a blood test. And so the judge talked about the no refusals, and so we're probably going to be facing that in a year or two down the road here in Oregon. And so we're telling states now that are looking at this legalization, think about those laws down the road that you're going to need. And so data really does play into that. And so the OHA, they can help us with data, but unfortunately, sometimes it's hard getting that data. And so it's like, who do we rely upon sometimes to get this data?
Well, and I think cross-referencing that with the unfortunate increase in fatalities that we have in the state of Oregon, I think it would be difficult to dispute that we don't have a trend and that it's not aligned with something that we can do something about. So I'm right there with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Russell.
So a couple quick ideas. As your safety plans, you're adopting a Vision Zero. You could go to a 0-0 for your blood alcohol or any other impairment, which of course I'm sure would get a lot of attention. When I was on a recent ride, I came through and there's a town in California that had blue and white signs that they weren't tourism services. They basically said DUII, automatic vehicle forfeiture. Which, most riders really love their motorcycles, and, if you have an unfortunate event, the first thing you always ask is can I walk, is how's the bike? So there's some of that. We've been doing a lot of reach with our liaisons, the various clubs, trying to work with them to have them to not have any alcohol involved with their rides, which would then, spill over to not having anything else involved with their rides. And then the last one, because I know we're really pressed for time, one of the joys of living in a western state is we have a thing called the initiative. And if you're blocked in the legislature, and you can't do it as a state agency, but there are partners who can produce ballot initiatives. And so if you have a bill that you've tried 5-6 times and it hasn't made it, there's always the initiative process, which is also a teachable moment during the public education campaign. So it may not be successful at the ballot, but it might be successful in getting your message across about how marijuana is more different than alcohol, and that it's not necessarily as safe as people might believe that it is. And then,
Great suggestions. Please.
Oh, to answer your question, you have a lot of hard work ahead of you. But if you look at the current legislation, is there enough for enforcement? Is there enough for treatment? Look at the current legislation and see if that can change. That would be a hope.
Okay.
That would be something to look at. That would be quick. We need more enforcement. We need more DREs. We talk about this at OTSC, and we're frustrated.
Yeah.
Poor Chuck. I feel sorry for Chuck. So do that. Look at the current legislation. More appropriation for treatment and for enforcement, and more DREs.
Thank you.
Jerome Cooper, just making a comment about the Governor's Advisory Committee composition. There have been 2 appointments recently. One has been John Mercer, and I was on that committee for 21 years. 5 years I was the chairman. You were appointed the chairman, it must have been about 13 years ago.
Probably.
But anyway, John Mercer will be there. He will participate. I'm a former pro tem judge out of Multnomah County. Many judges have come and gone from that jurisdiction, and they can't show up. They'll try to do it by phone, they'll call, have their say, and then they'll be asked, Judge X, do you have something to say? They're gone. They're
Yeah.
on their dockets. They've got
Yeah.
these heavy dockets, and no one's going to let them
Yeah.
escape to Salem for a morning session. It isn't going to work. John Mercer runs his own dockets up there, but more importantly, he's the kind of guy who's going to make the commitment.
Great.
And that's going to make a big difference. But the second one, and this is something that Matt would be interested in, Andy Olson's been appointed. And he is a legislator from Lynn County. He's a representative. He's a Republican. He's a vice chair
Yes.
of the House Judiciary. But he's not coming to the meetings now because the sessions, it takes up too much time. But once they're done, I think he'll be there, and he'll learn a lot. I know that during I knew him at the police academy. He was the lieutenant in charge of training. He had training officers there. I was there as staff attorney, and we were talking. And we went for 20 years, and he wasn't sure he even remembered me, which made me feel bad. But when I did get a chance to talk to him, I realized he was off this requirement of there be 10 drugs that are on the list only. And then he was backing off that because there might have been a circuit judge in Lynn County who was backing him off. I understand he's swung back to now, hopefully, Chuck, anything, that's going to impair it.
He has, yes.
Pardon?
He has, yes.
Yeah, yes. So there's this learning process, and I think he's going to gain a lot, but it'll give us access to talk to a legislator. And I know the House is volatile. Every 2 years, they got to run and be reelected. He can do it. He's pretty popular. He's doing a good job. And the last thing is he's on the driving while distracted. It's open the Rules Committee, but he's dogged. This guy has been on it.
No, there's no question about that, if I may, Madam Chair,
please.
and Judge Cooper and Judge Mercer will understand this. The commonalities with this conversation and distracted driving are striking in terms of the lack of research and data, the education communication component, law enforcement, not enough boots on the ground, and we're at a hinge moment in terms of timing, because as we're talking distracted driving, and I will tell you, you heard earlier from Ms. Horner, we are on the dash 23 amendments to something that, at least for this director, was self-evident. We're shifting into the cultural norms, and what we know to change cultural norms is extremely difficult, and it's a long-term commitment on so many different fronts. And I think we have an arms race, a timing issue here. Mr. Hayes, you spoke to 29 states now having some form of medical or recreational. There comes a point when across the nation there's a critical mass. Now, notwithstanding the disposition at the federal government, eventually if states continue to queue up, and we're well over half, something may tilt there as well. Foundational work needs to be done right now, and it's hard, and you need legislative champions. But to Ms. Weber's point, if you continue down the same pathway and you just can't get to the destination, maybe you pivot new ways of doing business, maybe an incremental approach, because that's distracted driving. Because the Lord knows the first thing that came at us. There are so many different things with distracted driving. Why are you just addressing this issue on cell phones?
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere, to your point. So.
If I could comment one more time.
Please, Your Honor.
And I feel a little bit strange being on the committee as a city employee rather than a county or state. And I appreciate Judge Cooper's kind remarks, and the things the director just said is one of the strategies has to realize that DUII isn't a state problem, it's a local community problem. That's where people drive, that's where they drink, that's where they get killed. And not having the city government and county government engaged as a necessary ingredient in addressing the problem and thinking the state is going to solve it for us is false. And it's poor planning, so that if the cities don't engage resources. And one of the things we did by accident in our DUI court program was engage the administration and police and the city council and the mayor, and to see the success that they can achieve in their community to make it safe. It's just been striking, the support we've received and the amount of buy-in and resources they're willing to allocate to try to deal with DUII as a community problem. And so whether it's training the budget for the police, whether it's supporting an intensive supervision court, whether it's getting to speak at different, letting me do this, those are the kind of things that are the benefit of not just the strategy going up to the federal government, but don't lose track of the local judge, the city council, the mayors, in how they have a role in community safety in this area by what they do within their government. There's appears to me as much or more discretionary funds, a few zeros short of the state level, of course, but discretionary funds on the local level, there's as much or more discretion than there is on the state level. So I just have to say that I'm really thankful for the Beaverton City Council and the Beaverton Mayor's Office and how supportive they've been in seeing the connection between their court handling DUI cases in the way that we have with the impact on safety in their city. And then people will want to get more involved. Thank you.
Good points.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lohman. I just wanted to briefly touch on something that Judge Mercer said earlier about treatment. I'm not sure if folks understand that the treatment system hasn't been changed in a long time. There was a rules committee, I think it was probably about 10 years ago that I was involved with, where we were trying to expand the requirements for treatment, make it a little bit more individualized than what it is now. And that went through all of the processes and was killed. And so right now, people don't understand that these repeat offenders only have a minimum requirement of 90 days in treatment. And they are only being urine tested once a month, and I'm having to fight the treatment programs to even get them to do that. And so that's an issue with the Oregon Health Authority. I'm glad to hear that they're going to be trying to update the rules again, but they need some support in that respect because we've tried to do it before, and when it got past Oregon Health Authority and into the upper echelons, it was killed. So I would really encourage some support there as well.
I think you bring up a great point is, there are so many pieces to this. It's not just one agency or one individual. The local public safety coordinating councils around the state have city individuals, and representatives from city councils and police, and then also treatment providers and health services. And I mean, it really may be the option, the opportunity rowing behind some of the budget issues that come along. If we share in supporting other state agencies in terms of the need and how the investment in capacity helps all of us be able to meet this need. I think that may strengthen the discussion going forward. We have gone a fair amount over, and I'll take the chair's prerogative of doing that. This has been a very rich discussion, and I'm grateful to each one of you for the commitment of time and effort, both as a citizen of Oregon, but also as chair of the commission. Count us in as partners, and if there are ways in which, if there is a meeting that you would like us to come and share in a dialogue as well, this is a two-way conversation, and we very much appreciate your time today and the commitment to safety in Oregon. Okay.
I just concur with that. As Troy said, this is obviously it is an all-star group here, and it's impressive what you're doing, and it's impressive that you're taking the time from your already busy lives to do this, and we appreciate it and hope you keep it up.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Victor, great to see you again. Yes.
Including you. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press *#.
John, are you on the phone? Okay.
What was that game show? Phone a friend? Then you... No. Oh, yeah. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Thank you. Yes, that's what we're doing. Sean will have the answer. Thank you. If we have anyone who is listening in or watching online, we are waiting for one of our commission members to join us by phone. That way we have a quorum to be able to take the next agenda items, and we appreciate your patience. Thank you.
I'll leave it and he gets on.
Yeah, come back.
Yes, thank you. Travel safe. Okay, we are going to adjust our agenda and go ahead and take, where is motor carrier? F. Okay, very good. Miss Ramsdell, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And let me start with a thank you, because we've had you on our agenda in the past and wanted to hear how the great work of the Motor Carrier Division is doing. And we have had to move you to another agenda and very much appreciate your patience with us. And the floor is yours. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to hearing how things are going.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I am Amy Ramsdell, for the record. I'm the Motor Carrier Division Administrator. And it looks like they're getting our slides up. In the interest of time, I'll just keep going. The Motor Carrier Division is responsible for regulating the trucking industry in Oregon. We have 283 employees that are dedicated to promoting a safe and efficient and a responsible commercial transportation industry. We look for opportunities to streamline our regulatory requirements, and we preserve the infrastructure through our size and weight permitting and enforcement operations, and we try to foster a spirit of collaboration with the trucking industry. Over 80% of freight in Oregon is moved by trucks, and so it's important that we work together with them to provide safe and efficient movement of goods throughout the state. And so that's our mission. So I want to give an overview of our 4 main program areas. The first is our federal safety and our green light programs. On the slide, you'll see the top 5 causes that truck at fault crashes. We actively are engaged in working with our law enforcement officers to address those driver behaviors that are the key causes of truck at fault crashes. Our staff perform safety inspections at the roadside. They also do motor carrier compliance audits at their place of business. We take both an educational and an enforcement approach to that work, trying to help them with paperwork and requirements. But then we also take a look at their hours of service and the mechanical functions within the trucks to see if there's anything unsafe on the road. If there is, we do put it out of service until such time as repairs are made. Let's see. Our local, state, and law enforcement officers are trained to do truck inspections. We take the data provided by the Transportation Development Division and we focus our efforts along major freight routes where truck at fault crashes occur, which would be the interstates and US 97. Our goal always is to reduce truck at fault crashes, and so we provide funding to local law enforcement as well as state police to do probable cause stops for the behaviors that you see on the screens and then follow up with a truck inspection. We have 400 certified safety inspectors throughout Oregon performing that work. And so this is what a typical day for our field safety staff looks like. You can see some of them crawling under the truck. It's both our safety and our enforcement staff that do that. We do bus inspections. You can see an audit up in the upper left-hand corner. And then in the right-hand corner is a program that we're very proud of. We have a nationally certified trainer in Oregon who provides level 1 truck inspection training both to our staff and local law enforcement. This allows us to get people trained without doing travel nationwide through the National Training Center. And then in the middle is our Greenlight program. Greenlight has helped us to keep up with growing trucking volumes while we've reduced our staff over the years. At our peak in 2001, we had over 400 employees, and we're now down to 283. Our pre-clearance site weighs about 1.4 million trucks annually, and our 88 enforcement officers weigh 2 million trucks. So it makes up a significant portion of our workload. And we're trying to expand the use of that. We issue transponders, and we've always done that through our safety section, but we've moved it up to our registration section, sort of with a, do you want a transponder with that? When you register your vehicle, marketing mode, if you will, to encourage the use of those devices and help us keep up with the growing traffic.
So I have a very elementary question. So where are we doing the inspections? Are those, obviously if there's cause, but are we also inspecting at other times where folks are on the roadway, or where, help me with how that works.
How that works?
Yeah.
So we will set up at one of our field enforcement locations. Sometimes it's just simply a wide area on the shoulder. You might see that, and we bring portable scales. And so if a motor carrier enforcement officer weighs the truck and they see something is off, or they see something in our database that indicates perhaps they might have been traveling for too long because we see weighings at multiple locations, we pull the truck aside and we take a look and we do a walk around, and then we look at their logbook to see, are they in compliance with their hours of service. And then at our major ports of entry, we have a truck inspection bay. And so when we're staffing that, we will pull trucks in based on a screen of the trucks going by. And we have a lot of data available. And so we will use the plate number on the truck or the transponder, and it pulls up the carrier's record. We have information from federal safety databases, so we can look at their safety rating. Again, that information about weighings. And then, are they in compliance? Do they pay their taxes on time? If you're not in compliance with that paperwork, there's chances you might not be in compliance with other paperwork as well. And we use all of those indicators to trigger a truck inspection. And so the hub of our division is our motor carrier services section. That is our contact center where people call us to do business. And so we have a variety of services that we do. We currently have 7,600 Oregon motor carriers that represent 45,000 vehicles, but we have 26,000 accounts that we manage, and those are carriers from outside the state of Oregon. That represents 350,000 vehicles, which we renew every year. We issue weight mile tax credentials, and we collect over $300 million in weight mile tax and fees each year. We also collect over $50 million in registration fees each year. Our participation in the International Registration Plan and the International Fuels Tax allow motor carriers to do business just with us, to get their credentials to operate throughout the United States and parts of Canada. So we are a one-stop shop for carriers. It is important to us that we maintain good customer service levels as part of this. And so with the new phone system that you may have heard about, we are cautiously anxious to get that implemented. It provides opportunities for us to do some efficiencies and better route our phone calls to experts and based on the subject matter that the carrier indicates they're calling for. It also gives them opportunities to do business with us on the phone, just like you might have with your bank, where you can look up your account status and do transactions over the phone. We want to be full service. That's why we're calling it a contact center, not a call center. And we want to provide opportunities for them in the future to do business on a variety of devices. So we also have our oversize overweight permitting program that's responsible for the movement of large loads throughout Oregon. We coordinate with the Highway Division's project delivery and maintenance staff to make sure loads are moving safely through the work zones. And we provide notification to the trucking industry on restrictions or delays. We also work with our county partners and county road authorities to issue permits on their behalf. And we have a partnership with 3 counties and 2 private entities to issue annual oversize overweight permits. That partnership makes up 5 FTE, and so they are good business partners for us. Our field enforcement staff, we have 88 people 88 stations throughout the state where we conduct size and weight enforcement. We also partner with Highway Division staff during the winter storms to provide chain enforcement in those areas where they request it. And then we move our portable scales wherever needed. Sometimes we partner with locals during certain seasons when there is a lack of compliance with permitting and other safety requirements. Our audit services are responsible for screening all of our weight mile tax accounts as part of our participation in those 2 international plans. We have to audit 3% of the motor carriers registered to do business with us annually. So we do those along with weight mile tax audits. Our pre-audit team screened almost all of the 26,000 accounts over this last year. We were at 24,000. We are working on a project to automate that screening, and we believe once that is done, we'll be able to take a look at each and every account each year, at least through an automated process. And then from that, our pre-audit staff screen it to determine, does it need a full audit, and an auditor will go to the place of business and look through their records. This last year, our audit staff were able to identify an additional 6.2 million funds for recovery. And so staff in our registration services work with them to collect the payment. Should they fail to meet those pay terms, we work with staff in Central Services Collections Department to set up pay plans and take whatever action necessary to collect delinquent debt. I know that was a key item for this session. We have a team of people, some of the experts within our division, that work as a risk mitigation team. They take a look at high-risk accounts for failure of non-payment, and we have some statutory authority that allows us to be somewhat creative in collecting debt, and that team was able to recover an additional $1.3 million over the last year, in addition to that 6.2 that was identified by audit.
Do you have an example of the creativity?
Yes.
Okay. Are we calling grandma or?
No.
Okay,
no.
just checking.
Yeah, right. Automatic vehicle forfeiture. There you
So, what things we can do, we can restrict their online use. So we can make it so that they have to call us every time to do business, because our online services don't quite have the measures in them to that human intuition to say something's not right when you're ordering this credential. So that's a privilege, and we can take that away. The other thing that we can do is suspend their account through a civil action. So it might be 5 days, it might be indefinitely until they pay their debt. So what happens then is each time they come across one of our scales, they can be issued a citation for up to $400 for operating with their account while suspended. In extreme cases, we can partner with the Department of Justice to do what we call successor debt. They may, and this is a trend nationwide, they start a company, they leave a lot of debt on the table, and then they start a new entity. And so statute gives us the ability to
do kind of like a performance bond. We call it a highway use tax bond. So we bond them up front so that we can bill that should they leave money on the table. And sometimes that's a financial disincentive to do business in Oregon. And it creates a fair and a level playing field for the motor carriers who are complying and who are paying their taxes. So those are some examples. And so in addition, Audit Services has our complaint resolution unit, and this is a service that we have that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. We regulate the household goods industry, and that's done for consumer protection. We have rate regulation, much like the Public Utilities Commission does over their rates that they charge consumers. And so sometimes you may hear about us doing what we call a sting operation, where there are illegal movers that legal movers have notified us of, and we arrange for the movement of household goods. We secure services, and we work with local law enforcement partners to ensure that we do not have anybody entering people's household who have been convicted of certain felonies that might be dangerous to a shipper, such as any sex crimes. And then we take civil action based on their noncompliance. We also answer any questions that potential shippers might have about the rates and fees that are charged when they're moving household goods. Our key initiatives over the next year, we want to really focus on communication, collaboration, and customer service. So communication with the industry, we want to be notifying them of changes that are coming, providing educational outreach to help them to be voluntarily compliant. We want to communicate with the other divisions within ODOT and our local enforcement partners and build those relationships and that collaboration. And we're always striving to provide excellent customer service. As the industry continues to grow, we will look towards technology to make us responsive to their needs so that there's no undue wait time at our counters or on our phones. We also, like many parts of the agency, have a lot of institutional knowledge, and some of that has walked out the door. 3 of our 5 senior managers are brand new within the last year or 2. And so before any more walks out the door, we are really focusing on downloading that information, talking about our policies and our processes to make sure that those individuals who take their place are familiar with what we do and why we do it. And then we'll also invest heavily in the training of our staff to develop that next line of leaders and do some succession planning. But we want to make sure everyone understands what the mission of Motor Carrier is and how that contributes to the mission of ODOT. We've audited DMV's new employee orientation, and they do a great job of covering that in your first 6 months. We want to do that in our division as well. It's a fabulous process. And so what's on the horizon for our division? On the screen is our next 12 to 18 month IT plan, if you will. We are preparing for the federal mandate of electronic logging devices as opposed to the old paper copy logbooks. We're doing training of our staff and law enforcement and also providing information to the motor carrier industry. Some of that is a bit of a buyer beware. Well, these are designed to track hours of service. They are not designed to do the record keeping for the payment of taxes and registration. And we've heard from our counterparts, particularly in Indiana, they've seen quite a bit of these electronic logging devices already, and when they've started to perform their fuels tax and registration audits, carriers do not have adequate records. So we're going to try to be proactive and provide them information to make sure there's a variety of add-ons that they can select, that they do so that we don't end up with a substantial audit. I mentioned our pre-audit screening tool, and we have 2 peer reviews this year. And we're hoping to learn from our partners across the U.S. and better, make better our programs, but also share with them some of the things that we think we do pretty well. And I would say our auditors do quite a fine job when we're talking about the IFTA and IRP reviews. And then we are revamping our online transaction system. There are requirements to change our PIN, our personal identification number, and with that, it opens up the door for services that provide support to the trucking industry to do business with us in a whole new way. we'll be following what the state of Nevada did and providing a truck reporting service portal so that those powers of attorney for the trucking industry who do all of their financial transactions now have a way to do business with us online. And so we have partnered with companies like Glowstone and Penske Leasing and J.J. Keller to provide tools that they can use to do business on behalf of the motor carriers. We think that will also reduce the number of incoming calls that we get to make us more efficient. And so that's our truck reporting agent. And we want to move to electronic credential renewals. There is a ballot measure for IRP, and they are looking towards electronic credentials by 2020. And so the fact that we do a lot of our annual renewal through paper copies that we mail out and then take paper in, if we're going to be electronic, let's be electronic throughout the entire process. And so that is what the Motor Carrier Division has been up to. And I thank you for the opportunity to share that with you. And if you have any questions.
Finally.
Oh, no, it's fine.
A couple of questions. Just to make sure I get the facts straight. I think you said you're dealing with 26,000 accounts
Yes,
and 350,000 separate vehicles? Is that?
that's correct.
Okay. And you said you had 283 employees now, but you mentioned 400 safety inspectors. I assume we have the number of those on contracts.
Those are local and state law enforcement partners.
Oh, I see.
And so we do have agreements with them to provide some funding assistance to get them to do work for us.
Okay, well, that leads to, this is a sort of parochial question, but it may be a broader application as well. In Ashland, we periodically have some of our neighborhoods complaining about trucks coming through town, coming off of I-5 at the southernmost entrance into Ashland. And people complain that they're trying to avoid inspections.
Yes.
We've talked with ODOT a number of times with Greg Del Ponte when he was here, and he graciously provided a pretty extensive explanation, explaining that they really weren't avoiding, by taking that route into town, they would actually not avoid inspection and having to pay the weight mail tax. But our neighborhoods and some of our elected officials didn't get it, and we keep struggling with how to describe this. So I would ask you if you could help articulate why it is that just taking that southernmost exit in as you're heading north would not allow a trucker to escape dealing with the motor carrier division. And I think mostly what's happening is actually they're going into town to make deliveries.
I think that's the case. Well, first I would like to see what Mr. Del Ponte wrote.
I'd be happy to share that with you.
I can find it I can find it as well. But I think the answer probably is it depends. I think a lot of it probably is it's a local delivery. And so if they are coming off the interstate to deliver, then we would get that information. I mean, there's paperwork involved in that, and that's part of our audit process, is to look at those bills of lading and see where are they delivering their product. So in the terms of avoiding paying weight mile tax, we can get that information fairly easily. And then in terms of the inspection piece, that's an interesting piece, and I'm going to ask that I might have some time to get back to you on that.
Okay, well, I will also forward Greg's response to you.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things he said is we could, as a city, impose a no trucks restriction, but then our police have said, well, we don't have time to deal with that.
And we hear that a lot when we're working with our local partners and trying to get them to help us to get that safety inspection work done. It's really all about resources. They want to help. But it's the time.
And sites to do it on.
And having a safe place is part of that as well. So
Okay, well, more
Yep.
more to come then.
Yes,
We'll have a
absolutely.
offline conversation.
Great.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Commissioner O'Halloran. We had noted that you'd be arriving a bit late today, so glad that you could join us. Please, if you have questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. Just from curiosity, what you articulated how many carriers are registered, how many trucks are registered in Oregon. At any given time, how many of them do you think are in Oregon? And in other words, do we, because we have low registration costs, do you think there are just thousands of trucks that never ever enter the borders?
That never enter the borders.
Seems, I mean, I see just from traveling around the country, I always see Oregon registered trucks everywhere, and maybe that's just the nature of the business. They go all over the place.
They do.
But it seems that like a disproportionately percentage, maybe I'm just disproportionately sensitive to Oregon plates, but I was just wondering, can you kind of game the system to say we're going to register in Oregon because it's inexpensive and the tax, there isn't a sales tax on this or that or whatever. So I'm just trying to think, can it be gamed financially where you would set up something here so that you could register vehicles here and then not really operate here in any capacity?
There are what we call basing requirements through the International Registration Plan. And so some of what we do on that compliance piece is, one, make sure they have to have a place of business. It has to be staffed. It has to have a phone in working order, and they have to be receiving mail there. So we have staff that actually go out and investigate that. And if we don't do that, we can have some problems with our participation in that plan. So,
Okay,
does that
I was just
help?
curious, and that's good to know. Thank you.
Yes.
I had no idea. Well, a few comments. I wanted to say that I really appreciate the contact center and the push for customer service really being as a priority. And I'm encouraged to hear the recovery of the 6.2 million. That is great work to make sure that we have a level playing field and equity in terms of businesses operating in Oregon. But most important, I really enjoyed the fact that you were talking about the educational and enforcement approach, because I think that if we anticipate that everyone's a bad actor, it doesn't really reconcile with the customer service piece. So I appreciate the attention to the education as well as the enforcement.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And looks like we'll have further discussion, but thank you for your great work and for the presentation today.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Mr. Mather. Next item we'll go on to is G, and this is an informational presentation on the Winter Recreation Advisory Committee. Unfortunately, members of the committee were not able to join us today, but we do have some appointments that we need to provide as well. So, Mr. Mather, I'll turn it
Thank
over
you,
to you.
Madam Chairs, members of the Commission. Paul Mather, Highway Division Administrator. As the Chair said here, to give you a little information around the Winter Recreation Advisory Committee, but also formally to ask you to reappoint 4 of the members and appoint 1 new member. If you look in your packet, there's a bio on each of those. They're each very dedicated individuals. You'll see some of them have served for quite a number of years already on the committee. I've been involved with the committee actually throughout my career, and they are a very dedicated advisory committee to the commission and do some outstanding work. I just want to share with you a little bit of history of the program. Briefly, this was a program that started in 1977. It was a kind of a landmark program that started back then that has been copied and replicated throughout the country because of its success. The problem we were having back then was we were constitutionally limited to plowing roads on the highway, and we had people wanting to go up and use the snow and recreate, and they were parking literally in the middle of the highway and causing us difficulty. We were the ones with the snow plows and the snow blowers, so we were equipped to do it. We just needed a funding source to be able to plow these recreational areas, and this was a great program that has been set up and operated very effectively ever since. Today we have about 100 snow parks statewide, including many downhill ski areas. This Winter Recreation Advisory Committee, again, is an advisory committee to you. They have 7 members made up of 2 ski area operators, 1 Nordic Club representative, a Northwest Ski Association representative, Snowmobile Association representative, and 2 members at large that are involved with winter recreation. Their role is to help advise us on adding or subtracting snow parks from the program, how we manage the funds in the program, as well as they make recommendations on the fee structure for the snow park program. Currently, the fees are $25 for an annual permit, $9 for a 3-day permit, and $4 for a 1-day permit. And obviously, this has to be a self-supporting program. Has been one of the issues in that we can't spend highway funds, and is kind of central to the whole structure and process with that as we manage this in a way that, again, we use our equipment, we use our staff that are highly trained in snow removal to help out ski areas as well as these recreational areas for other users in the wintertime. So just a brief run through of the program, and again, asking for the commission to approve the reappointment of 3 members and 1 new member to the committee.
Excellent. Thank you for the overview. Yes, please.
Madam Chair, I would just move that we reappoint Mr. Shoemaker, Mr. Kastner, and Ms. Belshaw, and appoint Mr. Scully to the Winter Recreation Advisory Committee.
Excellent.
Can I just
Please.
add one comment
Yes,
before we
discussion.
I had some experience with this committee a few years ago because of issues down at the Mount Ashland ski area where they were expanding a parking lot and wanted to be able to include that in the snow park area, and it was very important to do so because people were parking on the main road into the ski area, and it was a real safety issue. And this committee, I thought, addressed that as responsibly and as quickly as they could have. It's a good example of good government, I thought. So I just wanted to say thank you to the group. I'm sorry they're not here to hear that. But
well, I know, again, in my work that I do with the advisory committee, they do excellent work for you and are very dedicated.
Please convey the kudos from Commissioner Lohman and a thank you from the commission as a whole as well. Other discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. At this point, Dr. Garrett, I believe we will go ahead and recess for lunch. Okay, thank you. We will be back at 1:10.